Broadcasting live from the Phoenix Business RadioX studio in Tempe, Arizona. You are tuning in to Culture Crush with Kendra Maples. This podcast will dive into a variety of companies that are crushing it with a great company culture.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Culture Crush. On this podcast, we focus on everything surrounding businesses with a good company culture. We talk with company leaders to learn about real-life experiences, tips, and best practices for creating a healthy work environment. Today, we have two amazing individuals that takes it another step further. It's not just highlighting companies with a great culture, but it's then highlighting companies that are building a great why and then the resources behind it, right? I've said it before, we can't continue to cheer on the A+ soccer player on a team, right? We have to give the other team members the resources and the opportunities to become those A+ players as well. And that's what this show does. So we're bringing in those guests and those resources and those examples from leaders to truly help build company culture within companies. So today we have two fantastic guests that I'm really excited to bring into a conversation together. First, we have Brad. Okay, I'm going to say it slow. Cable Romani.
You nailed it.
Yes. That's all I needed today. I mean, of course, more of our conversation, but yes. Okay. Founder of Culture Mindful. Welcome. And we have Michelle Sirocco, Chief Social Responsibility Officer for Televerti, and also the Executive Director of Televerti Foundation. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I am, like I said, I'm very excited to have both of you in this room together today, in this virtual room that we have today, because I try to find alignment when it comes to different companies that I bring on this podcast. And I truly felt the alignment with Brad, the company that you're growing and your why of what brought you to that point. And Michelle, what you guys are doing with Televerti. There's great alignment when it comes to supporting people and the mental health side of things and giving people opportunities. There's some true alignment. So what I want to do is I want to start with hearing a little bit about both of you and tell us a little bit about you. It can be your company. It can be however much or little you want to tell us, but we have quite a bit of time to have this conversation together. So don't feel like you have to give me the 20 seconds. Tell us a little bit about you. And Brad, I'm going to start with you. Your professional background is with talent, culture, employee experience. You did a ton in the recruitment and the staffing side. But what else? Tell us a little bit more about you. Who's Brad?
Yeah. Well, so everybody's got multiple sides to them. So like a professional side and a personal side. So let's start with the professional end. I'll just start by saying first, Kendra, I'm super excited to be here. And thank you so much for hosting such an amazing show. And Michelle, it's so great to meet you. I have to say, I'm going to be honest. I'm a little nervous. I learned about your story. Nervous in the sense that I'm so honored to be sharing floor time with you and airspace with you, because the work that you're doing is truly, seriously incredible. And I think having environments like this, my mother always would say, if you see something good, it's really important to participate because that's the only way good things continue to happen. And so I see what you're doing at Televerti as something amazing and something good. And surely a show like this to talk about culture and keep it at the forefront is really amazing. So thank you for having me, and it's really great to be here. So my background professionally is talent, culture, and employee experience. Built and sold a staffing company with my brother in the past between 2004 to 2010. We specialized in staffing for exhibitions, conferences, product launches, corporate events, and things like that. Best thing I got out of it is I met my wife. We've been together about 15 years through that. And we were two young kids splitting Subway sandwiches in a 500 square feet office, figuring out how we're going to pay rent and just doing what we love doing. Exited that business in 2010, and that was in Dubai for context. Moved from there to Toronto, got into recruiting for construction, real estate, and property management. Educationally, I went to university for mechanical engineering, and interestingly, my electives were organizational behavior towards the end. And to quote my professor, he said, Brad, you seem to have a knack for people and understanding human behavior. So I see, you're doing engineering, but I somehow see that you're going to do something in the space of people and culture. And lucky guess, he was right. He was absolutely right. So got into recruiting for construction and real estate because I wanted to get into recruiting for something a little bit more technical. Moved from there to work with a large staffing company based out of California, but with offices all over North America, in staffing for accounting and finance for 2 years. Did that for 2 years. Was headhunted to work with a company in the property management space, in residential property management, or as they call it in the US, homeowner associations, was part of their leadership team. And from there, I took a very interesting pivot in my career. I ended up stumbling into the world of office coffee services. Now, as you imagine, coffee in the office is a thing. And if you asked me 5 years ago, Brad, would you ever work in that space? I would have been like, I'm not really sure. I don't think so. Like, I see myself as a talent and culture and people experience person, but I work in a company that specializes in managing coffee programs for offices. Not really. But call me naive, but I was really fascinated to learn that companies justify the spend of money on coffee, refreshments, and snacks for culture. And, that seems intuitive to a lot of people right now, but, back in the day, not really. Fun fact time, if you look at the numbers of how much money is spent in offices and commercial spaces on coffee and snacks, it's about $5.4 billion. So I was fascinated, actually. My entrepreneurial brain kicked in and said, I'm fascinated. This is a business. So moved into that world to learn about culture through the lens of coffee. Did that dance for 4 years, realized that, I'm still an advocate, of course, healthy snack programs and good refreshment programs do add to the employee experience and definitely does help in cultivating culture. But I realized that there was a need for something. So there was a need for a solution to assist organizations with cultivating culture-mindful workplaces to boost workplace performance and mental well-being. I think everybody can agree, or at least there's a good sense that culture is something that impacts the performance of your organization. And now maybe I'm dating myself, but I promise I do have grays. They're all on the sides, so you can't see them because I've got a fresh haircut. But the quote that Peter Drucker said, which was, or the urban legend says that it was someone else, and then Peter Drucker kind of took it on and snowballed from there, is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And 15 years ago, culture was considered the woo-woo thing in the room. And Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast in an MBA class, if I'm not mistaken. And now culture is at the forefront of organizations. The data that we're seeing is that culture eats a little bit more than strategy for breakfast. I'd like to go one step further and say, actually, culture eats more than strategy for breakfast. So we see culture as something that doesn't just impact the performance of your team, but it also impacts the mental well-being of your team as well, and your people. So that's our mission right now, is how do we assist organizations cultivate culture-mindful workplaces to boost workplace performance and mental well-being. That's me on the professional side. That's what we're doing right now. We're incubated out of the Ryerson Venture Zone, which is one of Canada's top business schools. On my personal side, just to add a little bit of color, I'm a third-generation genocide survivor. My grandparents survived the civil genocide that broke out in 1947 on the border of India and Pakistan. For the people that don't know, that's listening, long story short, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh used to be one country prior to 1947. 1947 happened, the British left, they created borders, and they split the country into three parts, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. My grandparents were on the border of India and Pakistan, and unfortunately that event sparked a massive civil genocide that displaced roughly about 200,000 people passed away. The numbers are unofficial, so the numbers are actually between 200,000 to 2 million people passed away in the event, and it displaced 12 million people. Actually, so try to imagine evacuating a city the size of New York in a matter of a couple of months. So my grandparents survived that genocide, and they moved to Sri Lanka, actually. They found their way to, which is a teardrop country below India. My parents grew up there. My grandfather retired and moved to a city called Hyderabad in India, which is in the middle part of India. For context, it's the same city that the CEO of Microsoft comes from, Satya Nadella. My dad finished university there, and then he moved to Dubai, and that's where my story starts. I was born and raised in Dubai, grew up there. My mom needed medical attention, so we ended up going to India for her treatments. So for 4 years, it was back and forth between Dubai and India. My mom fought a strong fight, but she ended up passing away in a city called Pune. Plan actually at the time was, this is part of the interesting part about my journey. I was actually supposed to move to New Jersey. After my mom passed away, my dad had a real estate battle to fight in Sri Lanka. So he said, what we're going to do is we're going to dock in this city called Chennai, which is in the south part of India. And just for context, it is a place that I am culturally not of a heritage at all. Most people don't realize this. If you look at India, depending on where you are in India, the cultural shift changes dramatically. I'm talking language, food, music, arts. It's completely different. The more northwest you go, it's a little bit Middle Eastern, a little bit Persian, and you start seeing that influence. The more northeast you go, you start seeing Chinese influence and Oriental influence. The more south you go, the skin tone gets a little darker. They're more muscular, I think. So Chennai was a city that my dad said we're going to dock in for a couple of years. I was supposed to finish high school there and then move to New York and New Jersey for university. Went to an Italian Catholic high school there. My dad realized that his court case in Sri Lanka was going to take a lot longer for him to finish. I ended up finishing university there, moved to Dubai, and then moved to Toronto. Sorry for that extremely long-winded explanation of my background. It's always a cup of coffee just explaining that. So hopefully I didn't kill the airtime.
Right? No, but when I go back and listen to this, I'm going to look at a map while I track Brad's story across a map. But no, it lets us hear and know and understand a little bit about you. That way, as we get into this conversation about the why, right? All of that kind of fits into play. Michelle, tell us a little bit about you. Who's Michelle?
That's such a fabulous story, and it's a hard act to follow. And when you started and you mentioned that, how you felt about meeting me and sharing airtime with me, I'm always a little kind of dumbfounded when somebody says something like that, because when I go back to the whole story of how I got to where I am, there's a point in my life when I thought that no one would ever be honored to meet me or happy to spend time with me. So it's sometimes a nice reminder to think about where I came from to where I am today. So thank you for sharing the airtime with me. And thank you, Kendra, for providing for the platform for me to share the story about Televerti and the foundation and what we do. And I am actually surprised to say that I've been with the company for 23 years as of next month. So I don't know, maybe I was like 12 when I joined the company or something.
That's awesome.
I find it hard to believe that I've been doing anything in my life for 23 years. But yeah, so, the story of Televerti is that, it's a business to business sales and marketing tech company that's it's a for-profit business that was founded 27 years ago, based on the idea that by providing women in prison with jobs and training and education, we could build a profitable business while providing the women with the marketable skills necessary to transition out of prison into a meaningful and rewarding career where they could take care of themselves, take care of their families and their children, and never have to go back to prison again. It was the brainchild of a gentleman who was involved with prison ministries, and he and a partner were ASU professors, Arizona State University professors. And they were having trouble having access to the women in the prison. And so they came up with an idea that if they could start a business inside the prison, then they could have access to the women more frequently and more regularly and more women. And so that's what started the idea. One had a background in call centers. And so he said, let's start up a call center in this women's prison in downtown Phoenix. That's where it all began. And so roughly about 6 months into doing it, they were running out of money and they had no paying customers. And they met our former co-founder and CEO, Jim Hooker, who had a background in technology. He was a former IBM sales executive, and he built and sold a couple of computer leasing businesses in the mid-90s. He was a retired kind of entrepreneurial guy looking for the next thing to do. And when they took him to visit the prison call center, he looked at it and thought, oh my gosh, this is brilliant. Like, what a fabulous idea. If we can teach these women to sell technology, we can turn this into a profitable business and really make a difference in the lives of these women. And, in the early days, he probably really just came at it from this entrepreneurial idea of this looks like a fun, exciting business to build. And then in the process, he fell in love with the business model and realized the impact that it was having from, one person, the first person who transitioned out under his watch, and then the second, and then the 10th and the 20th. And then as we grew the business, so I started with the company in 1999 when I was serving a 7-year prison sentence here in Arizona. And the only thing I knew was that I wanted to have a better life when I got out of prison. The only job I'd ever had was tending bar, and I had 2 small kids, and I had a felony conviction and wanted to figure out how I was going to get out of prison and get my children back and get a job. And, and the fear was that nobody would ever hire me because I had been convicted of a felony and I had no skills. And so I looked at Televerti as the opportunity for me to rebuild my life, because rumor had it was if you were really good at the job when you were in prison, when you got out, you could get a job at the corporate office. And so I thought, okay, this is my golden ticket. I don't even know what this company does, but I'm going to go and I'm going to be really, really good at it. And so that was kind of my mantra, and that's what I did. So and so over the years, when I started with the company, we were just one small little call center in downtown Phoenix. We had about 30 people working for the company. By the time I was released, we had grown to be about 75, 85 people in the prison, as well as our corporate office. And I came out in position as a sales rep to help grow the company. And so my job was to go out and find customers that were willing to outsource their sales and marketing services to women in prison. It's kind of an odd thing, like especially this was now early 2002. The world was really very much on the mindset of lock them up and throw away the key. If you know anything about mass incarceration in our country, the U.S. is number one at incarcerating people, which means that 1 in 2 people have an immediate family member that's currently or formerly incarcerated. And this all began really about the same time we started the company. If you look at the history of mass incarceration, it's a hockey stick that begins in about 1994, the year that the company was founded, when we moved into the truth in sentencing law and everything around the war on drugs and all of that. And so as I continued my career with the company, our country became fascinated and enamored with incarcerating individuals. And we were growing as a company, and over the past years have expanded to the point of, like I said, when I first started, 30 people who were incarcerated working for us, to today. We have engagement centers. There's 4 of them here in Arizona in the women's prisons, 2 in Indiana, 1 in Florida, 1 in Her Majesty's prison outside of Manchester, England, employing about 500 women in sales, marketing, and technical administration positions. We've had almost 4,000 women work for us and get released over the years. And so as time went on, we continued to grow, but we always kept the story a little bit close to the vest. Our CEO was afraid of what the world would say or what they would do when they found out that we had companies that were our customers, that were companies like SAP or Microsoft or Dell, and how this would show up in the media and how the media might, attack those companies for using, a company like ours to call their customers. But so, kind of roll the camera forward, 2018, our CEO retired, Jim retired. And we brought on a new CEO. And when she joined the organization, she really looked at it and said, this is the best kept secret in business. And let's figure out how to go and change that. And that's when she asked me to take on this role of Chief Impact Officer, which is, Kendra, how you and I initially first met and how I got into my relationship with conscious capitalism. and this idea that there was a movement out there that could define what we were doing. Because prior to that, we were just a little company doing our thing on the side, and people who knew us thought we were really cool, but we didn't really align to anything. And, learning that there was this movement of conscious capitalism and B Corp and meaningful business and all the things that go along with it now, the business is a force for good, really gave us a platform to go out and talk about how you could have a business and change the lives of individuals as you went. So that's a long way to get to where we are. And I haven't even got all the way to the whole entire thing. But I can stop talking for now, at least so I can take a drink of water and we can, move to the next portion of the conversation.
Yes, take a drink of water. First off, I have to say that it's so neat to see. I've seen you talk a number of times, and the history and the background of Televerti like it's part of you, because after 23 years, it truly is, right?
Yeah.
But that shift in 2018 to no longer hiding this secret, right? And actually telling people and showing up that there is a why and it's purpose driven and it's very intentional of how the company started with, providing these opportunities to these incarcerated women. I've seen you talk and spit these numbers out, and they're crazy numbers and statistics. But for you being part of that journey, what does that feel like to you? Because you truly, I know I asked the question, but now I'm going to add an asterisk because you truly, especially here in the Phoenix community, your name is, somebody says your name and they're like, yeah, Televerti, and you're a firehouse, but you've been part of this whole journey. What does that feel like? What does that look like from, Michelle's perspective of all of that? Like, was it a good shift, a better shift? Like, what did that look like? What did it feel like?
Well, so it's a bizarre shift, to be perfectly honest with you, right? So, you go to, I was released from prison in 2002. The only thing I cared about was me, my children, my career, my future, right? And that was predicated on the job that I was being offered at Televerti, which was to go and sell the idea that people should outsource their work to prisoners, right? And I wasn't exactly proud of my background. It was my dirty little secret. And certainly as I went out into the market as a sales rep selling our services, I didn't tell anybody that it was my story because that would have impacted my credibility. Mm-hmm. And that's really how it went for years is, what I knew, like I said, first it was all about me, but then I realized as I was doing it was that the more I could help the company grow, the more women that could have the same opportunity as me. Mm-hmm. And so then I was like, hey, this is really cool. Like, I want to sell a lot more, and me and my two best sales partners, we were both formerly incarcerated women. And we were like, you know what, our whole goal was to get more women jobs. I don't even know that it was about growing the company. It was just about getting more women jobs.
Yeah.
And, and then my career kept going. And next thing I knew, I had, teams of these women that were reporting to me. And then I started to visually see the impact that it was having on individuals' lives as they transitioned out and they came to work for me and on my own life. Right. I remember when somebody first said to me that I was their role model, and I was like, what? How in the world did I get to be a role model for anyone? And, that was a long time ago, and we would take clients to go visit the prison and in the early days, we didn't even tell them about the prison until they signed the contract. And then we would say, oh, and by the way, you want to come train your team? Well, I'm going to need your driver's license and your social security number. And oh, what do you mean you didn't know that we were in a prison? That was one way,
Oops, forgot to tell you.
Yeah, I thought everybody knew that we were a company of we're like a $2 million company. Right. We think everybody knows, and then it became, okay, this is really, we're the best at what we do, right? Jim's position was we always had to be at least twice as good as our competition because everybody expected us to be twice as bad as them. And in order to overcome the stigma of what we were doing, we had to be exponentially better than anyone else. And so, but we were, and it was easy to be that because we had this loyal, dedicated, motivated workforce of people who really wanted to be phenomenal at their jobs. And so then kind of keep rolling forward, as we got to be a bigger company, it started to become something that we sold with. It became our differentiator. When I took over in marketing, I started to say, look, let's start to make sure people know this is why we're the best at what we do. What happened was in 2018, when I was asked to take on this chief impact role, that's when I started to learn about the incarceration, and I was shocked. So even though I had been walking side by side and living and breathing this for the 20 years up to that point, I had no idea what our country had done. I was oblivious to the fact that the incarceration of women during the period of time while I was working with them was up 500%. It was the fastest growing segment of incarcerated individuals in our country was women. And intuitively, I guess I always knew that 4 out of 5 women were mothers, and 60% of their children were under the age of 18. But I hadn't really looked at it from the outside looking in to say, what is the macro impact of what is happening in our country? How did this happen on my watch? And I didn't even know it. And I think that's the thing about mass incarceration in our country today is it's happened on everybody's watch and nobody knows until it touches them personally. Right. And so then to me, sometimes it's a little bit surreal. And now I just look at it and I know that this is a problem that everyone has to get involved in solving. It's not something that we can leave in the hands of governments or nonprofits. It's businesses, and everybody has to roll up their sleeves and say, how do we solve for this problem?
And that you guys have found that way to solve it in a successful way that's growing. And it's very purposeful in what you're doing, but it had to happen, right? Somebody has to take that focus. Like you said, we can't put it on somebody else. Some company, and that was you guys, to take that step and make that start with something that was a huge problem and needed some focus. I want to, on that note, bounce to Brad a little bit because it's similar in a way of, Brad, what you're starting, right? It's another topic. It's another conversation. It's another huge area that nobody wants to touch upon. They just assume that, we're just going to push it to the side. People are fine. They're going to figure out their mental health on their own. We can't do that. They're conversations that have to be addressed. They have to be addressed and made into common conversations. And Michelle, like what you were saying, you didn't want to talk about it for so long because that was you. That was the perception people would have on you and your past and your history. And now look at you, fast forward, people look at you as a role model. That shift, that's what we have to do with this topic of incarceration and this topic of mental health. And so, Brad, I want to bounce back to you on that. Tell us a little bit, I've had conversations with you about Culture Mindful and what you guys are doing and that why, right? And fill us in on whatever you're comfortable with your why and what's happening, or any examples. You and I have talked about examples that they're out there of the severity of the need for focus on mental health in work, and it's just not there.
Absolutely. And like I said, Michelle, when I hear your story over and over again, like every time I hear it, I learn something new. And every time I get a deeper glimpse into what you've done, I always think of this one saying is, one of the hardest things about leadership, or the benchmark of leadership, is to make sensible sense common. Sometimes we think just because we sense something in common, that means it's okay. But many times, the hardest thing of a leader to do is to walk into a room and when everybody senses and agrees with something or the way something is working, and it's actually not in the benefit of everybody, it's not constructive for the well-being of everybody that's involved, in and out. And then to come in and say, hey, this is actually not sensible. We need to change what we sense in common and what we agree on. Because ultimately, if you think about it, common sense is just what we agree in common.
Mm-hmm.
If we agree on something and that becomes the common agreement, then that becomes the common sense. It's really hard. You have to shift that. You touched on this, Michelle. It's everybody's responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
It is like when it comes to good workplace culture, leaders are facilitators and enablers of good culture, no doubt, no questions asked. But that said, good culture is everybody's responsibility. Great culture only happens when everybody says, I'm going to contribute to positive culture on a daily basis. Going into the topic of mental health, so now when we think about culture and when we talk about culture, most organizations will talk about culture and most leaders will refer to culture through the lens of performance management, employee attraction, and employee retention. And very valid, right? It does impact those three things. But the one thing we don't talk about, and we need to raise the bar on awareness, is the impact of workplace culture on employee mental health. When organization, I think we think of it intuitively. We understand that intuitively. If you think of culture in an organization, it sits on a foundation of three things: physical safety, psychological safety, and resiliency, or growth mindset. Because physical safety and psychological safety, to a certain degree, they're taken care of by policies and procedures put in place by the Ministry of Labor, or wherever your body of authority is, what governs how employers are meant to operate a business or operate the lay of the land for the workforce. And resiliency is really important at the foundational level, because one thing for sure, when you walk into work tomorrow, nothing's going to go exactly according to plan. So resiliency and growth mindset and problem solving, that's a huge part of it. The Mental Health Association of America put out an article for the first time that talked about how workplace culture might be impacting your mental health. And that was the first public article written by a mental health institution on mental health in the workplace, or on the impact of workplace culture on mental health. That was in 2019, and we're still not talking about it enough. It's baffling, quite frankly. When companies think of mental health for their workforce, employee assistance programs is one big checkbox, right? Making sure that you have an employee assistance program, and making sure that you're cultivating an environment where people can reach out and ask for help. And that's absolutely critical. That's absolutely important. There's no doubt about that. But one thing that we need to raise the bar on is, how do we cultivate an environment where everybody is contributing to positive workplace culture on a daily basis, and how they're taking that individual responsibility? The why is very simple, quite frankly. It's because, I'll quote my mom on this one because I think it's really relevant. She said, people realize, my mom was very intuitive and very poetic, and, she passed away when I was really young. So I felt that she needed to give me tidbits of information that I could carry into my adulthood and help me understand how to cope with life. So one was on well-being and society well-being. And again, to a certain degree, my mother's frame of reference was, they were genocide survivors. They were literally first-generation genocide survivors. They can tell stories of how their parents survived almost passing away, trying to move and actually leaving everything they knew behind for safety. Like one of the stories, my grandfather left his entire wealth, his entire house, and just literally had to leave with what he could carry to safe harbor. And there was almost an 80% chance that he would not make it. So my mother said, most people don't realize this, but one day we will. And I think we're getting there. And I think the work, obviously, Televerti is doing and with conscious capitalism is, the well-being of everybody is dependent on the well-being of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
We think that our well-being is singular, or if that is a sense to a certain degree, but it's not. We're all interconnected. We really are. I'll give you a simple example. In Toronto, when I first moved here in 2010, I was renting a place, and I rented a condo next to community housing. And initially, when I rented my condo, some of my friends were like, Brad, be careful, there's community housing close by. you know, it's too close to community housing because it was considered as low, it was perceived as low income housing. So the likelihood for, issues or challenges may come across. I didn't care. Like I thought of my mother. I said, you know what? It's close to downtown. It's close enough to Union Station. I'm good. I've never had a problem. Never had a problem. And my wife, there are days, and this is a perfect example where I think about this and how the well-being of everybody is dependent on the well-being of everybody. There are days where sometimes I might have to go to bed early at 9 o'clock at night. Maybe my wife might work late and she'll come back at maybe 9:30 or 10. And the reason that I'm able to sleep comfortably between 9 and 10 is because I know the people outside are fine.
Mhm.
And that's the simplest way that I can put how the well-being of everybody is dependent on the well-being. And it's no different when it comes to culture in the workplace. And that awareness needs to be there. And so that's the work that we're doing with that Culture Mindful, because there's enough data to show
Mhm.
that toxic work environments have an adverse impact on employee mental well-being. We need to shift that. The SHRM, which is the body of authority in the US that governs HR, they did a massive report on the cost of toxic culture, or the toxic culture on the economy. And their numbers were, it accounted for $223 billion over 5 years in lost productivity and turnover and a whole bunch of adverse effects as well. So our position is simply this. Culture is something that impacts not just the performance of your workplace, but it also impacts the mental well-being of people as well.
Mhm.
And in order to cultivate healthy workplace cultures, it requires everybody to contribute to positive workplace culture in a healthy way and cultivate a healthy dialogue within your organizations with how do we focus and how do we cultivate positive culture? How do we focus on things that are important and constructive to our performance and the way we operate?
Mhm.
And what we're doing is we're developing a digital platform to assist organizations in that. It's built on proven methods and concepts. And we're at the stage right now where we're ready to build. We're inviting pioneer mindset organizations to reach out to us, to connect with us, and pioneer the future work employee experience and how we go about cultivating positive workplace culture.
Mhm. So, my question to both of you is now, the three of us in this conversation, we understand the importance with, Televerti, what you guys are doing with supporting incarcerated women and allowing them those opportunities to build and gain resources and build a resume and everything so that they have better opportunities getting out, right? Lowering the recidivation. Oh my gosh, I can't say that word. That's the hardest word. You know what I'm talking about. That rate coming back, right? We also, the three of us in this conversation, we know that there are numbers and statistics and it's becoming more of a topic that people are starting to incorporate into conversations. And that's the mental health side of things, right? The three of us know that these are two things that need to become more common in conversations. These two things also directly relate to talking about company culture, right? And how it can improve, especially, Michelle, I've heard you talk before about, the issue with people having to check the box. Right there, they're out. Even if they had an amazing background as an executive or whatever it is, they made a mistake one day, 5 minutes, and now they have to check that box moving forward, applying for jobs. All of these pieces directly contribute to our growth in how we help companies succeed in growing their culture. So my question for the two of you is just very open, but how do we tackle that? How do we explain this to companies? And how do we relay this message to them that, Brad, this topic of mental health, that it's extremely important to have some sort of mental health program as part of the company to help their culture. Michelle, when it comes to this whole check the box situation, how do we convey and talk to company leaders about removing that? It's a checkbox that just totally shuts them out the door. It's stupid, right? So as we're having these conversations with company leaders, and either one of you can take this first, but But where does that start? How does that communication start with conveying this to leaders about culture?
Yeah, so I can take the first shot at it, because one of the things I'd like to talk about is the banning the box thing. Is so since we first met, and the first time you saw me speak at the Conscious Capitalism Conference was 3 years ago now, if you can believe that.
Right.
We've made huge progress in the ban the box initiative, to where large portions of companies have eliminated it altogether. They've moved it further into the process. There's certainly an awareness for it. So people are hearing and they're making changes. The conversations continue. But what I think the conversation for business leaders now is really, we have, I don't know if you've seen the jobs report, the most recent jobs report, right? 3.6% unemployment in Arizona or in the US. You can't pick up a thing without reading about nobody wants to work. People don't want to work. People are leaving the workforce forever. All of these different things. Businesses have a huge talent problem, right? Anybody who's working in talent HR, or even just a direct hiring manager, the challenge to get good talent and to get talent that will stay. We all know the Great Resignation is something everybody has to address. Yet we have these untapped talent pools that are being marginalized, overlooked, forgotten, or just downright discriminated against. And it's time to put an end to that and say, if we want to really talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and we really say that that's what we believe in, what we do in our companies, then it's time to say that means inclusion means everyone, right? That means people with a criminal record. That means people with mental health issues. That means all the line items in diversity, equity, inclusion mean everything, right? It's not a check the box exercise. And so when for people who have a criminal record, for people who are formerly incarcerated, they want to work. They want a job. And not only do they want a job, but once they get one, they're appreciative and eager and grateful to be there. So now you've got a dedicated, talent in your organization, and they tend to be more loyal. So recent Kellogg study said people with a criminal record are 13% more loyal, however you describe that word, right, than the average person. Because look, I can tell you, the only thing worse than going to prison is actually having to tell somebody you've been there. So, if you've been through the job interview process and you went through the process of explaining your background and you got the job and somebody took a chance on you, you don't really want to leave and go somewhere else and have to go through that again, unless, of course, the culture of that company is such that it's like, I can't survive here, or and so it's up to business leaders to not just change processes and remove boxes, but to develop cultures that seek out marginalized populations and accept them and embrace them and encourage and promote them, in their organizations.
Absolutely. And it's bang on. It's totally bang on. Because if we just understood and if we just saw that people are just our potential between, like I always say, we're human beings, adults or kids, really, we're all just going from seeds to petals. We're all just one form of life, going from where we are, which is innate potential, to finding our fullest expression. And in that journey, there is the individual responsibility, and then there is the environment, and that we have to cultivate. So if we just understood that the well-being of everybody is dependent on the well-being of everybody, we really need to just start understanding that we need everybody to be well for us to be well. And you can't have that without inclusion. My mother would say, I quote my mother a lot. But
we need to write a book about your mom's quotes, just so you know.
They are some really good quotes. So she would say, for example, discrimination, exclusion of any form is essentially a lapse in consciousness, just our inability to see something. I can tell you, for example, personal examples. So for example, you may not know it because of my sharp, lean, good looks right now, but I grew up obese. I'm just saying. So there were times when I was growing up, I would get excluded from certain places because I was obese. Just as a simple example, right? I'm still the same person. Soul's still the same. So, and people, we just need to see that. We need to understand that the well-being of society is largely dependent on people finding their holistic professional expression and them getting to their best place. And when that happens, everybody wins. And you speak about, I remember, Michelle, you talked about how it was about the purpose behind Televerti and why you guys were doing. I can relate to that because, there's always, when you're running an organization, there is this space of value and generating revenue in the marketplace. That's an element of doing business, which is very important, which is you're providing value into the marketplace that has a tangible revenue model, a fiscal model. But then there's the reward, which is not just in general the revenue. For me, for example, when we were staffing for exhibitions, conferences, and product launches, sure, the work was fun. But quite frankly, what really brought purpose to that work is that some of the people that we were working with that were doing part-time work with us, they were using the money to pay for university. They were using that money. It was a building space for them as work experience prior to them graduating, so that when they do graduate, they have some work experience and they can get into the job market. And I think, to answer your question directly, Kendra, we need to bring culture and make being culture mindful at the forefront, as simply as I can put. We need to always ask ourselves with how we're running our businesses, because the way I see it, ultimately through history, we've always just tried to improve three key things within the context of our environments. Whether you look 100 years from now or 100 years prior to now, is how do we get people to conduct themselves sensibly on a day-to-day basis? Two, how do we create environments where people engage with each other in a healthy way, in a meaningful way? And the third one is, how do we govern and conduct the affairs of our business, our society, our communities, locally and globally, in a way that has everybody's dignity, well-being, and fairness and prosperity at heart? How is it constructive towards that? And that needs to be a question that we ask on a daily basis, I feel.
Absolutely. And as you're talking about this, my brain was going a little crazy because I have so many thoughts and so many ideas and little time left in our conversation today. But it all kind of falls into, both of you mentioned that diversity and inclusion, right? All of these pieces of banning the box and the mental health, and it's all kind of in that same space, right? And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing with this podcast and Culture Crush as a business, is to provide those resources to companies. Because the other piece of it is, when they start to realize, right? They start to realize, okay, I heard Michelle talk once and she said I need to ban the box and be more inclusive, but then what? Right? And then, well, I heard Brad talk, and he was talking about the mental health side of things, and they're starting this platform, but then what? Right? There's always the then what's. And that's how it aligns, Michelle. That's how you and I were connected in the beginning, right? With conscious capitalism and being purpose driven. And so Brad's conversation, you're already leading into all of this. So don't worry, I'll loop you into all of that more. It's all these conversations that just need to become more common conversations, like we said, so that company leaders can pick up on this, right? And then companies like both of yours advocating for these different causes, and then, like me, shouting from the rooftops to companies to start to accept and implement some of these ideas and these thoughts that they need to become common, right? I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of questions I want to ask, but like I said, little time. So one of the things I want to dive into while we have a few more moments is, we're talking about these topics that need to be part of developing company culture, right? But Michelle, I do have a question for you about the culture of Televerti because you've got multiple sides, right? You've got the women that are incarcerated that are working for you, but you also have a lot of others that are not, they're doing operations jobs and executive level and whatnot, and they're not incarcerated. I do know that sometimes they work out of that space. And so give us some insight into what does the culture look like inside? I mean, you've got this mix of individuals working there. You've got such a strong purpose. You've got these women that are incarcerated that they have a passion, right? You said it in the very beginning. You said, I don't really know what this company does, but I'm going to do it and I'm going to nail it and I'm going to do it great. And that's what you've done, right? And so give us some insight into that view of Televerti and your culture inside and what is that like?
Michelle, I believe you're muted.
Michelle, I think you muted.
The number one thing we say these days.
You're good.
Sorry, I was muted.
You're good.
So, it's an interesting thing to think about the culture of the company in any organization, and so I don't know that our culture is any different. We have our own culture challenges and we have our own culture problems. We are a performance-driven organization, so regardless of who you are, where you are in the organization, you have KPIs that you are expected to achieve. We have, expectations of leaders and managers to do coaching and to be inclusive and to hold people accountable and to live up to our core values and hire and fire based on our core values. I mean, that's the principles that we teach and we adhere to because we are running a business inside the prison and we are teaching the women to be business professionals. So we run the business like a business, right? It's not a hobby. It's not, it's not just fun and games. It's not a program. It's a business. Mm-hmm. For the people who, the women who are currently incarcerated or have been recently released, the objective is for them to be in a job with clear expectations and guidelines and the support that they need to be successful. Mm-hmm. For the people who are not or have not been incarcerated that join the company, we have a set level of professionalism and expectation and the benefit of working in a place where you have purpose every day. And that purpose actually goes down to every single person in the organization, even the women who are incarcerated they know and understand that what they do each day reflects the brand of the company, and the brand of the company is what's dependent upon how we get more customers and retain existing customers. So more people like you can have a similar opportunity. And it's really it's part of the fabric of who we are. It's, we perform because we have a purpose and the purpose can't live on if we don't, meet the objectives and the expectations. And so, the cool thing is that any given day you can go home and know that you made an impact on somebody's life. And, every time I've considered leaving the organization myself, I kind of go, why would I care about this company that I'm interviewing for when I lay down in bed at night? Like, what about this is going to make me excited other than, the bottom line or, the gross margins or our EBITDA? Like, I live in a mindset that I don't really get excited about EBITDA anymore.
Well, and those conversations that you're having with yourself, right? Those are true and real conversations that are more common today, right? And that's why we have this huge number of individuals leaving companies because they're reflecting the same way you are. They're working for a company going, the culture sucks. My leader's not supporting me. There's no passion. There's no true purpose. Why am I here? And they question it and then they go, I don't have to. And they leave, right? It's different than, if we did a flashback 10, 15, 20 years ago, my dad was a frame technician and he worked on cars and man, he was a badass. He was so good at what he did. But I also know that he went to work and busted his ass because he needed to come home and feed our family. I don't think my dad went there and he was like, there's so much passion for this purpose of what I'm doing. No,
Yeah.
but he had a talent, he was good at it, and he busted his ass doing what he did. But now we have the opportunity to reflect a little bit more and go, okay, well, what's the purpose behind this, right? And so with somebody like Brad that's growing a team and you're small and mighty, but what you're doing is so amazing and so powerful, and it's going to grow so quickly. I know it is. Michelle, do you have any thoughts or advice or anything for someone like Brad who is now getting into the conversation of conscious capitalism and growing a brand that is very purposeful? And, what are some thoughts or any suggestions that you have for him at this point in his journey?
Well, I think that not to let purpose become the flavor of the month.
True.
That sounds really glib, but we all have our mission, vision, values. They're hanging on the wall, and that that they're either just words on the wall or they're what you live and believe and adhere to. And purpose is the same thing. If you're just saying you have a purpose for or you have the purpose at the top. So Brad, as you start your business, you have your purpose,
right?
And what that is, but how does that translate down to each of your employees, and how do they understand that this is why we do this, and this is why we get out of bed every day, and this is what we're hoping to accomplish, and then it becomes the same thing. Like we're in this to support the purpose, but it's also balancing purpose and profit.
Oh yeah.
Right. That's the ultimate balance. Like you can't run everybody over on the side of the boat to say, oh, it's all about the purpose and we're going to invest in the purpose. We're going to invest in the purpose. Like, no, because even though I just said, I don't really get excited about EBITDA. I have to have EBITDA in order to be able to run the business. So It's purpose beyond profit, not purpose in lieu of profit. So you have to find that balance, and then it's staying true to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it is, and getting the right team of people to help you build it and believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. Yeah, very valid advice. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned that there's that balance of purpose and profit, right? They can go together. They can be hand in hand. You got to pay bills. So you can't just, everything can't be, that passion for the purpose if there's not revenue coming in to actually pay bills. So I'm glad that you brought that up. So we have just a few moments left. So I want to give both of you the opportunity to give your last little, if you have any last tidbit that you're like, oh, I really wanted to share this in the conversation. Any last thought, advice, tips you want to share about culture, anything like that? I want to give you both just a moment before we hop off. And Brad, I'll let you go first.
I think the biggest one right now is really shining a spotlight on the impact of the cost of toxic workplace culture and what it does to a workforce. And doing it responsibly is really, really important. Where I'll leave it is I do think we're at a time right now in history, especially with the pandemic and everything that's going on. It's really, really important that we put culture on the forefront because it is, if you look at what culture is, the definition of culture, the logical or the intellectual definition of culture is that shared upon agreed values and behaviors. But I see culture as the invisible spinal cord of the organization. Mm-hmm. So if it's aligned in a healthy way, the organization will function effectively. And it is about effectively functioning. It's about effectively doing business. But the simple case I make here is the data clearly shows that workplace culture has an impact on performance and the mental health of your workforce. And it's really important to navigate that responsibly. And I do think we're at a stage right now where it needs to be at the forefront. One unfortunate story, I'll close with this. Two stories, actually. I'll make it really quick. So the first one is there was a case in Sydney, Australia, of a person by the name Mark Finlayson. And he was a 42-year-old senior project manager. And he was in a toxic work environment. And sadly, and he worked for a government institution that, just because it's a public environment, I won't mention the institution itself, but sadly, he committed suicide. His wife was so upset that she ended up suing the organization, saying, it was the impact of your culture that led to the demise of my husband's mental health. And as a result, he committed suicide. And what was really crazy is that their equivalent of workers' comp got involved, and they investigated the case, and they confirmed that it was the lack of support and it was the toxic work culture that led to the impact of his mental health, and he ended up passing away. And they held the organization accountable. They ended up paying his wife $800,000 in remuneration, and of course, and weekly compensation for his daughters. But I think we can all agree that, the compensation doesn't bring him back, right? So that the saddest thing is the loss of life. So toxic work environments, if toxic cultures, if they're not dealt with responsibly, can impact a lot more than culture. The second story is simply, if for anybody that hasn't seen this movie, I really recommend you do. Anybody that's in the space of talent and culture, or in helping people unleash their potential, there's this beautiful movie called The Man Who Knew Infinity. It's a true life story of a mathematician. His name was Ramanujan. He was writing math. He was from Chennai in India, in the south part of India. He was writing mathematical formulas way before his time, but he came from a very modest background. His boss, or his colleague with him at the time, said, your formulas are amazing. You need to get this published. We need to get this published. And he ended up sending his work to a professor by the name of Professor Harding at Oxford University in the UK. And at first he couldn't understand, how is this person writing mathematical formulas that was so advanced? And the movie, I won't spoil the movie for everybody, but it basically talks about their journey of how these two people were from completely different environments. They were from completely different social structures. And it talks about how their journey was in working together to eventually publish his work. And interestingly enough, his work is today used by NASA to understand black holes in the universe.
Nice.
And this was 100 years ago.
Wow.
So it's great. So when we choose to truly work with each other and really go above and beyond, sometimes the rewards can be incredible, amazing. I think Televerti is an example of that. Quite frankly, I see them unleashing potential with the way that they work and what they do, and the impact on community and society is amazing. It is tenfold, and it'll be felt everywhere. That's for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad. Michelle, what are your last final takeaway tips, thoughts?
Well, my last final thoughts are going to be what I forgot to talk about. So in this journey that I've been on for 20 some odd years, 2 years ago, I was asked to start the Televerti Foundation, which is really the nonprofit extension of the Televerti purpose. So what we did was in 2018, we set a goal to provide 10,000 life-changing opportunities within the next decade. And realizing that the efforts to do that by growing the business could be a little bit insurmountable. We also recognized, as I mentioned before, that there are 81,000 women who get out of prison every year, and they all deserve the opportunity to find and fulfill their full potential and come out of prison and have a better life. And so I started the Televerti Foundation. First order of business was to provide the women of Televerti with the reentry programs and support that they needed to really be able to walk out of prison and go to work in any organization and sit down next to any person and have the confidence and the comfort to be able to be successful. And so we've developed very comprehensive pre and post release programs for them, but also to leverage our 25 years of experience in training and developing incarcerated women to transition back into the community, to create prison to workforce pipelines for companies, right? I talked before, companies have this need for talent. There is this untapped talent pool. I had been running my big mouth telling companies they needed to get involved. And so I realized that I was being given a platform to actually help make that happen. And so we've recently opened our first workforce development center here in Arizona, where we're training and certifying women to become customer service, inside sales, and computer tech professionals, and then providing them with the reentry support and job placement for careers when they get released. We just got funding to open our second center here in Arizona, and we're looking to expand beyond. I've got my next target is Indianapolis. And so I would like to challenge the business folks that are listening to this podcast today to say, there's opportunities for you to get involved, whether that's through hiring some of the women that we are graduating from our programs, for sponsoring women to go through these programs, or even if you're so inclined to help us build another workforce development center in a prison near you. So I have to make that shameless plug that we're looking for support from business leaders for our women. And of course, if you're interested in volunteering or donating or getting involved in some fashion, you can find us at televertifoundation.org, or please connect with me on LinkedIn, Michelle Sirocco. I'm super easy to find. Just Google my name. I'll come up.
Awesome. I'm glad you got that in, because that was on my list and we didn't talk about it. So I'm glad you got to mention that. And those are the two best ways to reach out: the website and then finding you on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Okay. The fastest way. Either way, you come to the website and submit a form. We'll get back to you right away. On LinkedIn, I respond to everybody. So yes, please do.
Perfect. Okay. And then Brad, before we hop off, what's the best way for folks to reach out to you to learn more about what you guys are doing with Culture Mindful and to get involved with you guys? Oh, I think you're muted now. I'll mute next. Don't worry.
Sorry about that. So on LinkedIn, if you type Brad Kivel-Romani, I'll be the first person to come up. My name is amazing for SEO search. And we're on Instagram as well. And our website, culturemindful.com, will be up really soon. Should be up in the next couple of days. Those are the best ways to reach me.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you to the both of you. I have been looking forward to this conversation because they're pieces of that puzzle, right? When we talk about company culture, we talk about improving and the ways that we can improve. It's beyond, hey, we have a pool table, or hey, we have coffee, right, Brad? So much money is spent on coffee, and it goes beyond that. It goes to the inclusiveness, banning the box, the mental health support, all of those things. So I was looking forward to this conversation, and it was fantastic. So thank you to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
And thank you for joining us on the Culture Crush podcast, the podcast that does a deep dive with company leaders to learn about tips for good culture, real life experiences, and truly building a great company and a great company culture. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Culture Crush, the only podcast out there that does a deep dive of companies that are crushing it with a great company culture. If you think your company has a strong culture that should be highlighted, please reach out to Kendra Maples on LinkedIn or email us at culturecrushpodcast@gmail.com.